Welcome to Healing from Within. I'm your host, Tony Valen. You can contact me, Tony, at TonyValen.com, or visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. Follow the show on Twitter, at TBHFW. The show is also available on iTunes and YouTube. So joining us on today's show is Paul OMA. He's an intuitive astrologer and being a student of the science of astrology for 31 years and consulting professionally for 26 years. Paul was formerly the on-site columnist for Shirley Maclaine. Paul's a writer, teacher, and practitioner. You can learn more about Paul by going to pauloma.com. There you can connect with him on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. He also has an icon for his email, and you can just hit the icon and email him directly. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hi, Tony. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Oh, you're welcome.
So let's get started, Paul. Tell us who you are and where your journey began.
My journey began very young, actually. We were not raised religious. We were not a religious family. My mother had us baptized Catholic, but we were not made to practice any specific religion. I did, as I got older, study different paths, from the Kabbalah to mystical Christianity and even my own Catholicism. I kind of got into that for a while. Then I became disillusioned with the church. I would say, as far as my first exposure to metaphysics, there was a woman that lived on the block, and she was a tarot card reader. And I was only 15 years old, but I would let her read the cards for me. Sometimes she would let me watch as she read Family and Friends. That inspired me to get a deck. And then I would just go down there and, she would show me how to do different little readings and spreads and whatnot. But who's going to take a 15-year-old seriously?
Right.
But that's basically how it started, and my family didn't have a problem with that. And I think it's because my mother's side of the family were very naturally intuitive, spiritual people.
Right.
Like, they're no longer with us, but my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my great-aunt, as well as my mother, who is with us, they just were naturally, I would say, mediums, because they would come up with things around people and just tell people things that they felt when they saw them. But, there were no readers in my family.
Right.
But they were just naturally intuitive.
So you were 15 when you got your first deck of tarot, but before then you had been soul searching. It seems like you were really young when you were soul searching. What triggered that? What caused you to, at such a young age, question Christianity and your path?
That's a good question. That was in the days where you would go to the bookstore. There wasn't Amazon. There wasn't all of these opportunities for you. And everything was under, I remember, it was Astrology and the Occult. And that's what you would read. There was no, metaphysical shops all over the place. But I just found myself searching. That's a really good question, because I can't answer it. I've just always been spiritually inclined.
Yeah, and I feel that when we come to this world and we're born in this world, some of us are just born a little more awake than others, and I feel that you were awoken way before you even really understood what was going on with you. I know that I introduced you as an astrologer, and before we go into astrology, I know that now that you mentioned your soul searching was in tarot and everything, tell us the path that you took and step by step how you went from different things and led you to astrology.
Oh, okay. Well, when I was young, and I started driving, there was a bookstore here. I believe it was the only metaphysical bookstore in the Tampa Bay area. It was called the Cosmic Book Center, and it was owned by an astrologer. And actually, it was her home, and half of the home was a bookstore, and then the other half was where she lived with her children, and also where she would do the readings. But because she was an astrologer, the store was predominantly astrology books and literature. And this is before you could punch the person's data on a laptop and get the chart perfectly out in, seconds. So I did take some classes there with her and some workshops on astrology. Astrology always intimidated me when I was younger because of the mathematics behind it. It was very complicated to do a chart and to cast a chart. But little by little with her, that's when the astrology, the love for it rather, started to bloom. But then at 20 years old, I had one of those moments where you don't forget them. I went into a metaphysical store that was closer, and This woman was also an astrologer, and she had a lot of astrology books and classes. And that's when I technically, I guess you could say, began my journey with astrology. And that was right before my 20th birthday.
What is an astrological chart?
I say the astrological chart is like a mandala, a spiritual blueprint of the person. A mandala is sacred geometry. You'll find mandalas in Hinduism and Buddhism and the Kabbalah, like the flower of life and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when I look at the chart and I'm looking at all these symbols and glyphs, different mathematical angles, I kind of start getting into the person's personality, things that are going on with them, things that have happened to them, what's coming up. I always say also the stars guide, they don't decide. There's nothing written in stone in an astrology chart. It is a method of harnessing the cycles of life, knowing when to grab the bull by the ring, knowing when to kind of sit back a little bit, knowing when to go for it. It's very electional. Like people will come to you and they'll want to know what's a good time to buy a house, what's a good time to start a business, marriage, etc. Getting back to the birth chart, and being a mandala of the person, when you put the birthday in and the time of birth and the place of birth, you're going to get a 360-degree wheel. And that wheel is going to be divided by 12 slices. Mm-hmm. And that wheel is going to have planets, and the planets are going to be in signs, and the signs are going to be mathematically angled or aspected to one another. And one of my teachers told me that the best way to remember this is that the signs are actors. All the signs go through one of the 12 signs of the zodiac. Those signs are the roles that these actors are playing. These planets in these signs are going to be in one of 12 houses that we'll get into later. So that's the stages that these planets and these signs are acting out their roles. The aspects are mathematical angles that the planets are making to each other. And that's how they are interacting with each other in this divine play. Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that went into the next question I was going to ask you. You mentioned some components of the chart already. So you're talking about, and I'm sorry, you said aspects?
Aspects. Aspects are just different mathematical angles that one planet will make to another in a birth chart.
And what's another component? What are the other components? Give a brief explanation and how they work.
Okay, well, you have each planet is in a sign. So let's say the moon takes roughly 2.5 days to go through a sign. So in about a lunar month, in about 28.5 days or so, the moon goes through the whole zodiac. So let's say you were born, the moon was in Cancer, which just simply means that the moon was reflecting off of the constellation of Cancer when you were born. The sun, as far as for you, was in Leo when you were born.
Right.
Okay, we know the sun doesn't move. What the sun was doing was reflecting off of the constellation of Leo when you were born.
Got it.
There's a zodiacal belt that runs around our sun. Am I making sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's so complicated, but don't expect me to get it because I don't know the first thing about astrology, but I'm getting, the basics.
No, it's hard also to articulate it. Right. That's why when I do a reading, I tell the person, look, if I'm using a lot of astrological verbiage, just stick with me because it's a way that I can articulate it, mm-hmm. but I'm going to give it to you in layman's terms.
Okay.
Because all of these things I'm talking about, the 12 houses, the planets, the signs they're in, the aspects, it's all scientifically mathematical. Astronomy and astrology were the same science. They broke in the Renaissance. Astronomy became astronomy, astrology became astrology in the Renaissance. There's a saying that anything that happens at a particular moment of time takes on the energy and the essence of that time. And I think Carl Jung said that, I'm not sure though. And so when you take your first breath, that's your astrology chart. That's the snapshot of the universe when you were born. So then when we look at your chart, we see where is the universe now and how is it affecting your birth or natal chart. So you come to me now and I look at your birth chart that we've already analyzed. But then I look at the transits, which are where the planets are now, and how they're affecting that birth chart. That birth chart is always with you. If you want to believe that it's in your auric field, if it's in your Akashic records, whatnot, that birth chart is always with you, that energy.
So when an astrologer does a reading for you, do they use the birth chart as the foundation to go off of and go from there?
Correct, yes.
Oh, got it. So the birth chart is what you start out with, and based on how all these other, where the stars are, where the planets are, whatever, it's how they relate to the time you were born, how they're affecting you now. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. You see, I learned something. That's
Yeah, you're good.
Yes, well, you're good at explaining it. That's why I was saying. So these different types of charts. So the birth chart is always with you. It doesn't change. It is a snapshot of who you are. So what other types of charts are there whenever people come to ask you?
Oh, wow. Well, the transit chart is basically where the planets are right now, and how they're affecting you now, how they're going to affect you, and how they have affected you. Because we work with a book called an ephemeris. Ephemeris means no longer than a day. Because when you look at an ephemeris, you're tracking planetary motion. And these planets don't stay in one place longer than a day, i.e. the word ephemeris.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll look and we'll see, okay, right now Tony has Mars in the 5th house, Saturn is in the 9th, making an aspect to the rising sign. I'm just giving you examples.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, and we can go all the way back to your birth, and we can go, decades ahead of where you are right now, because we know exactly where these planets are going to be. So that's a transit. Then we can do what's called secondary progressions. We can do solar arc movements. We can do solar returns. And these are all different ways of moving the chart and looking at how the universe is affecting the chart. But what you said is perfectly right for listeners. Everything is coming off of that birth chart. Your date, time, place of birth, where you took your first breath, the time that you took your first breath. That's why the time in astrology is so important, because it calculates the planets in those positions, but also what's called the rising sign, which is where the chart takes off. Within 24 hours, all 12 signs rise over the eastern horizon. So depending on the longitude and latitude where you were born on the earth and the time, there was a specific time rising. And that is where the chart takes off. And that's where astrology gets a bad name, because you read an astrology column in the newspaper and it makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
Or even a good astrologer, and let's say Vanity Fair magazine, for instance, and or any other magazine, but it's not resonating with you. And it's because that's called sun sign astrology. That's written rather as if you were born Leo, because you're a Leo, right?
Right.
Okay, so it's as if you were Leo rising. Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, I get it. In other words, I mean, even though they have, and that was one of the questions I was going to ask you also, that a lot of times we seek these horoscopes in all these little magazines and the Inquirer and whatever, and then sometimes you see these horoscopes and they seem to really hit on target, and then others are way off, and it's the same two are Leos, but one is perfect and the other one doesn't know what the hell it's talking about. But it's because of all these other aspects and everything you're talking about.
Right. And all of predictive work goes off of the rising sign. For instance, when you read and it'll tell you, oh, you have the new moon in your 7th house, and Venus is entering Gemini, which would be your 3rd house and whatnot. That is only if you were Leo rising.
Right.
Does that make sense? Because that's really important about how astrology has a bad name.
Right, no, I get it. So basically people, I guess the thing that really matters is that you have to have a birth chart done first.
Right.
So that you know how astrology and how an astrological reading will affect you and your life and what it's trying to tell you.
Right. Like when I used to write for Shirley Maclaine, I wrote a weekly column, and I would tell them, even if they weren't going to get a chart done, to go online and figure out their rising sign. Because then when you do read the Vanity Fair article, or even a newspaper column, and you read your rising sign, it's going to make a lot of sense.
So we talked about the different charts, some of the components. I know that people come to you for charts for different reasons, and I think we've already touched on it, but I want to touch a little further on them.
Sure.
Sometimes people want to know about relationships. Some people want to talk about relocation. different things. So, how accurate can an astrologer be with helping someone make a decision? Or once again, I think you already touched on this. It's a guideline. It's not set in stone.
Well, one of my astrology teachers, because I would say I had 3 really good ones, told me that astrology is never wrong. It's the astrologer. And I don't know if you're familiar with Yogananda in his book, Autobiography of a Yogi. His guru was an astrologer. And he expressed to Yogananda that if you don't have an intuitive ability, you might as well not even study astrology. You have to have some type of an intuitiveness. And I don't like the word psychic, even though it just means of the soul or of the mind. But I mean, he was right, because it's so scientific, you can just get caught in all that scientificness and not relate to the person one-on-one on an emotional level.
Exactly. And you see, that was one of the things when you were talking about all these mathematicals, blah, blah, blah.
And it gets boring.
And the thing about it also is that I've never truly understood how someone can be so logical yet intuitive. You know what I mean? So it's kind of that's why with astrologers and numerologists, whenever I talk to them, I try to be as careful as possible and slow them down, because they get so caught up in the logic of it that I'm trying to get them to explain to people more about the intuition about astrology and how it really works, and try to get them out of the math and into the intuition. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Well, then you're a good client. Yes, it makes total sense.
Yeah. So you already explained about the astrology and all the math and everything that goes on, but I know that there's a lot of intuition that goes into it, and you were talking about the tarot cards and working on your intuition. Why don't you tell us about that experience and how you incorporate it to astrology?
Well, yeah, I believe as I got older, after my initial exposure to the tarot at 15, is where the intuitiveness really started to kick in. And then when I started doing tarot readings, before I was doing astrology readings, I would pick up on people's loved ones that had passed over. I would get names. I would get names of people that hadn't passed over. And I started having experiences with my family members and my spirit guides and having visions and whatnot. So I think that the tarot cards kind of quickened that intuition as a kid. Mm-hmm. And then as I got older, it started getting stronger. And I learned how to kind of articulate it and deal with it.
With everything that you've learned through your spiritual path and whatever, do you feel like you're in the right place now as an astrologer? What would you really say your main gift is and what you have to offer people?
Well, I think it's applying the mediumship with the astrology chart, because I kind of don't like the word medium either. Like I said, I didn't like the word psychic. Mm-hmm. But when I'm looking at a chart and I'm looking at it objectively and I'm trying to, figure things out, I'll pick up on a person's child's name or a death that they had experienced or a relative on the other side. And that honestly is not a chart. That's me picking that up, looking at their chart. It's like my higher self is picking up on these symbols that I'm looking at. And then I'm relaying them to them.
This is Tony Valen, host of Healing From Within. You can contact me with any show ideas. Contact me, Tony at TonyValen.com, or visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. Follow the show on Twitter at TVHFW. Like us on Facebook, or look for the Tony Valen channel on YouTube. Our guest today is Paul OMA. Paul is an intuitive astrologer and has been an astrologer for 31 years, consulting professionally for 26 years. Paul formerly was the on-site columnist for Shirley Maclaine. Paul is a writer, teacher, and practitioner. You can learn more about Paul by going to PaulOMA, that's PaulOMA.com. There you can connect with him on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also email him directly just by hitting the email icon on his website. Paul, talk to us about the 12 houses and what they mean and how they can affect someone's chart.
Well, remember when we were talking about the rising sign and how that's calculated? That begins the first house. And then the houses are divided. It's like the sky is divided into 12 parts. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a lot of different ways of dividing this, so we're not getting into that. That's very boring. So, seriously. So the first house, I'll go over some adjectives.
Yeah. So the general. I mean, because I know it could be a lot, but let's
Right.
just keep it
Well,
general.
this is where we look as far as the sign that is on the cusp, or like, let's say, the door of the house,
Okay.
and any planets that are in there, any planets that are currently transiting there, planets at birth, etc. So the first house is your persona. The rising sign is so important because that sign, whatever that sign is what people meet when they first meet you. It's the mask that you hide behind. It's also your physical body, your appearance. It's the most important house, I think, along with some others, but I think that's the most important because you have to calculate that to start the chart.
Right.
Okay, your second house is money, finances, and your personal worth, how you honor yourself. Your third house is your neighborhood, the way you communicate, your day-to-day living, your cousins. Fourth house is your mother, your home. So your home, anywhere you've moved, from when you moved out of your house to you went into your college dorm to the apartment you're living in now, it governs your home and also the way you like your home to be. It's an emotional house. It governs personal foundations. Sometimes our morals can be found in there. And what confuses a lot of people too is it actually is also a house that talks about the beginning but also the ending of your life. And it doesn't predict death in any way. What it does is kind of predicts the environment or the situation that you'll be in towards the end of your life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I don't predict death. I won't do that. I mean, we're not all 100% accurate, but I feel that it's just going to scare a person.
Yeah, exactly. But the other thing you also have to understand is what you said as a qualifier from the very beginning. Astrology is just a guideline. It's not written in stone.
Right.
So hopefully this would give someone, a wake-up call to maybe something that the way they're living their life or what certain things they're doing that will change.
Well, there's a lot of psychologists that and therapists that use astrology to get to know their patients better. Carl Jung and Freud used it. Hippocrates used it. Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, would not let a person study medicine until they were an astrologer.
Wow.
And this is all factual. So, yeah. So going on with the houses, I mean, then you
Yes.
have the fifth house. Fifth house is everything that's fun. It's fun. It's where romance begins. Before you're an item or you're exclusive, that's where romance is. It's where you take risk. It's children. It's usually where we look for the firstborn child. Gambling, travel for fun, things of that nature. The sixth house is your health, your hygiene, your pets, work, but it's work, it's what we do to pay the bills. It's not necessarily the career that we were born to strive for. Mm-hmm. So if you see a person that's young, they're still in college or they're not happy at work, you look at that house because that's how they're making a living. And it's also co-workers and the work environment. But it's not necessarily the career they should be in or what they should strive for. That's the 10th house. We'll get to that.
All right.
Okay, 7th house is partnerships. It can be legal issues, but it's partnerships. Whether they're gay, straight, whatever. It's your partner, long-term relationships, and marriage. That's what you look for there. Mm-hmm. The 8th house it's naturally ruled by Scorpio. It's a very intense house. It's death. It's regeneration. If you believe in reincarnation, it talks about your soul and your soul's journey. It's other people's money. It's how you benefit from others' money if you work in sales or whatever, or if you have invested in properties or whatnot. Also, it's our taxes because that's how we are getting money back. So that's a very deep house. 9th is long distance travel, philosophy, religion, metaphysics. It's when you take metaphysics and the occult to a higher level. If you're going to talk lower occult energy, which scares a lot of people, that would be the 8th house. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
The 10th is your father, and that's where the career and profession kicks in. So you should really stress with people and that planet's there, the sign that's on that house cusp, And when I say cusp, I just mean the sign that is like, it's like the door of that house. It's the beginning of that house. Those are issues that person should really be striving for work. So they get out of that 6th house of work just to make money, and they go into the 10th house of what they're here to do. The 11th house is hopes and wishes, goals, objectives, how we project our wants and our needs out into the environment and manifest them. So like if you're a spiritually inclined person, this would be the house of visualization and of manifestation. And it's also friends. I don't know if I've already said that, but it's a house of friendship. The 12th house is a difficult house to read because it's very deep. It's a house that is governed by Pisces, depending on your rising sign, but you always look at it as a Piscean house. So it deals with things that are hidden, issues that we're very insecure about. It deals with confinement. It deals with karma that we're bringing over from other lifetimes, and it deals also with our own undoing. In other words, how we can be our own worst enemy. So you have to look at that house and illuminate that house and figure out how a person can work with that energy. The water houses, which are the 4th, 8th, and 12th, are very deep, no pun intended, but they're very transformative. So it's the astrologer's job to look in there and see how this person can actualize those houses and benefit from them and not be a victim of them.
I guess it would depend on the astrologer how they use these houses, because the thing about it is that it's like anybody else that does a job. Someone can help someone so much by doing the job right, and or they could totally screw up somebody by focusing on the houses the wrong way. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? So I think it's very important for people to realize that I think it doesn't matter what an astrologer or a psychic or whoever tells you what they tell you. You know deep inside what resonates and what doesn't resonate, and what that person is on there. So
correct.
I think that's important to tell people that when you go to an astrologer and they don't seem to be really in tune with you, then they're not. So you
have to take what resonates with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was an astrologer in the 60s when the human potential movement was starting, named Dan Rudyard. And I believe his book, The Astrology of the Personality, is a really incredible book because he takes astrology out of that medieval, Renaissance, World War I, World War II, negative, fatalistic genre. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, in other words, you were born this day, this time, this place, this is your destiny, this is going to happen to you. And he took it and he expanded that. And then the astrologers, I would say, of the 60s and on to the 21st century are more that way, or at least I hope they are, because nothing is written in stone, because I believe we're co-creators with the universe. So
absolutely,
yeah. The chart is a tool that will help you, but it is also very accurate at predicting things, because where astrology differs from other divination tools is the timing. It can give you exact time frames of things, as to where you have to be very intuitive with the tarot when you're doing that, for instance.
Right.
Or if you're just doing a reading, an intuitive reading. But we know as an astrologer, Saturn entered Sagittarius this specific day, and it's going to be there 2.5 years. So it's going to be in, let's say, the person's 7th house. And for this many months, it's going to aspect, let's say, Mercury, and it's going to aspect, let's say, Venus. And different aspects can be very flowing and very benefic or challenging. So it's to be forewarned is to be forearmed.
Right.
Basically. And I use the tarot when I do a chart.
So let me ask you, I don't know if you could answer this question for me, but what's the difference between an astrologer and a numerologist?
Numerology I don't know much about, but numerology I know is a science that was developed by Pythagoras, the father of math. Mm-hmm. And they deal with numbers. But I know that each number resonates to a planet. But I'm not a numerologer. But also the tarot cards, every tarot card is governed by a planet or a sign or an element, because we work with the elements earth, air, fire, and water.
Right.
So when I do a tarot spread, I'm also looking not only at the tarot intuitively and what it means, but I'm also looking at the planet that governs over that card and or the sign that governs over that card.
Paul, when I first introduced you, I said you were a columnist for Shirley Maclaine. Tell me, how did that come about? How did you get to know her? How did it happen? How did you get this?
I've always liked her as an entertainer, and after reading her first spiritual book, Out on a Limb, I really followed her as far as an author. And when I read her book, God, this must have been around 2000, her book, The Camino, I noticed that in the back of the book there was a web address. So she had a website, and I looked at the website, and it had a lot of nice stuff on it. And they were advertising that she was going to have a podcast coming up, and it was a call-in show. So I listened to it. You didn't have to be a member or anything. I listened to it, and a lot of people were calling in and whatnot, and an astrologer called in. And she told her that this website of hers was going to be very prosperous, it was going to be very positive for her, etc., etc. And Shirley Maclaine was really engaged with this woman over the phone, and she had expressed that she didn't know a lot about astrology, which I thought was kind of strange, because she's known for being in metaphysics and writing all of these books and seminars that she's taken across the world and whatnot. So I got in touch with them via email if they needed an astrologer, if they needed someone to write a column, etc. They got back in touch with me, the CEO of the company did. Mm-hmm. And she told me that she wanted me to do her chart, her husband's chart, Shirley Maclaine's chart, and the chart of the business, the chart of the website. Because when you sign anything into being, when you incorporate something, you make something into an LLC, when you sign your marriage certificate, that is a chart. So I did that. This was back in the day where you did it on cassette. I sent the cassettes off to them, and then they offered me a job. And that's how it started. I did charts for people that ordered charts through the site, and then I did a weekly column for 3 years, yeah.
Wow. Starting
in 2000.
That's wonderful. So I bet that was a real nice opportunity for you, and you were able to show people your gifts. You know.
Yeah, it was a wonderful opportunity, and I'll always be really grateful to Shirley Maclaine for that.
Also, the other thing I mentioned about you in the introduction is that you teach astrology. What do you teach about astrology? I mean, how do you do these classes, or what's? Well,
I like to teach one-on-one,
mm-hmm.
and I just start with the very basics, kind of like what we're doing right now. But I like to, there's certain books that I like the person to have, print out a bunch of charts and start teaching the person how to read a chart, how to look at a chart. I mean, very basic you have to start off if the person doesn't have any knowledge. If they have some knowledge and they want to go deeper, then it's a whole different class. But I do prefer it one-on-one, even though now I'm doing readings out of Earth Angel Gifts.
Yes.
So I may be putting a workshop together and do some type of a workshop there, like a Astrology 101.
I think that's great. And so that's over at the, it's a Tampa metaphysical shop, Earth Angel Gifts, of which they do have a website, earthangelgifts.com. Both Paul and I work there, work out of the store. Paul does astrology charts and we'll be doing a class, and also tarot. And also I read out of there once in a while whenever people want to do one-on-one with me. So Paul, what type of resources are out there for people that want to be astrologers? What would you recommend as far as resources and books?
Well, I'm old-fashioned, so I would recommend books.
Okay.
Because I know and I trust these authors, and they go way back. I don't know a lot of the information that's online. I'm not judging anybody. I'm just saying I know that the authors of these books are good.
Sure. Yeah.
The book I started with, and there's a series of them, but this is the first book. And it's The Only Way to Learn Astrology, Volume 1. And her name is Marion March, Marion, and then just like the month of March. That's a good book, and if I'm doing a one-on-one class with a newbie, this is the one I go off of. There's another one, The Astrologer's Handbook, and the last name of the author is Sokoin, Sokoian. Alan Oken's Complete Astrology, the classic guide to modern astrology, is very good. And Alan is Alan, Oken is Oken''. Astrology, A Cosmic Science by Isabel Hickey is very good. People that are spiritually inclined, which of course anybody that's going to get into astrology is going to be, but this book just deals with that. It's a spiritual approach to astrology. And the author's name is Myrna. The last name is Lofthus. It's Lofthus. And that book is based on Edgar Casey's readings, where he talked about astrology. Astrology can be also, I do esoteric charts. If the person wants to know about past lives and different karmic debts and karma that they have with certain people and whatnot, there's a whole different school of astrology called esoteric astrology. And also we didn't touch upon the astrology of relationships, like combining the two charts of two people who are in love or going to marry or business associates. You can combine charts.
Well, Paul, I want to thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Thank you.
All the information you gave us. And if you want to know more about Paul, you can always go to pauloma.com. There you can connect with him on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also email him directly. Just hit the email icon on his website, or you can go to our website and we'll give you more information on Paul. You're listening to Healing from Within with Tony Valen, a show dedicated to helping understand metaphysics and how we are all one, how we are all energy, how we are all connected to the universe, and how we can connect to the universe for answers and healing. Our show airs on Blog Talk Radio every Wednesday. You can visit our website, healingfromwithin.net. Follow the show on Twitter at TVHFW. Like us on Facebook and look for the Tony Valen channel on YouTube. You can also connect directly with me and email me, tony@tonyvalen.com. Thank you so much, and love and light from all of us here at Healing from Within.